1. There. Had to keep the signature 1 at the end. I left it on the latest episode as well. You can hear the episode starts with 1. Milo Wolf podcast, or whatever we're called. Wolfpack podcast, a gay muscle and feels, is back here. It was fun. The tax evasion was fun for as long as it lasted. They came, they took everything away. All our equipment is now gone. So we have to shoot this from our respective homes. And by homes, I mean homeless shelters that we're both residing in. And yeah, you had fun with your super nice extravaganza setup, Milo, but it's now time to get back to reality and just do this online like civilized people.
We decided the listeners didn't deserve our setup. If you can still see some equipment in my mirror, psych, it's not a mirror. You can't see anything. It's stuff. Don't worry about it. I swear.
It was a well-thought joke there.
Indeed.
And with that out of the way, Unpack, this is Milo. We're introducing ourselves again. Previous episode was the first episode where we may have not said that we're back, but we were actually back because it was after a short break. But now we're back after the previous episode and after a week of not releasing any other episodes. And we are here as jacked as ever for the viewers. And as bald as ever for the viewers as well. And as annoying and ADHD as ever for the listeners. To talk about body fat percentage and why it may not really be a useful metric for you to track if you are somebody who cares about body composition changes over time and wants to have metrics that he can track or she can track to know whether they're making progress or not. So I'll start slow by asking you, dear friend and soon-to-be Dr. Milo Wolf, partials at long muscle lengths, a segue, no, just kidding. I'll ask you, have you been that guy ever before? The guy who tracked body fat or estimated it or whatever? I mean, obviously it's always estimated, but...
Yeah, very much so. There was a period of time in my training career where I was very concerned about being the exact right body fat to bulk out. So I think when you've never gotten really lean or really fat, like when you've kind of been pretty normal for a long time, you can be a bit bad at assessing your own body fat and whether or not it might be an issue for your bodybuilding or strength pursuits, right? And so for me, for a long time, from when I was like 16 to 20 maybe, I was relatively concerned with it, and I tried a variety of things from the US Navy formula, because back in the day, Great Knuckles plugged it. The only issue with that formula in my case, and I think in some people's cases, is if you train your neck directly, you're going to hypertrophy your neck, and that's going to throw off the formula quite heavily. So on a good day, it told me I was 8% body fat, when I wasn't 8% body fat. So
how did you feel back then, seeing 8%? Were you like, yeah?
And part of me was like, maybe I'm leaner than I think, but then part of me was like, dude, this definitely isn't right. Like, I could tell something wasn't right. But then I was like, but Great Knuckles said it was right. So really, is it right? Is it wrong? Who knows? But yeah, so for a long time I was concerned about my body fat percentage, trying to make sure it was optimal, quote unquote, to bulk out. And I think with time I sort of realized, especially after my first prep, I realized that the exact body fat at which you're at in the off-season doesn't matter all that much, as well as seeing the evidence around P ratio or lack thereof.
The evidence, a.k.a. us here shilling for SBS. Yes, he said it, Greg. He said it. Yes.
Okay. It's okay, we put quotation marks around the evidence. Don't worry.
Can you let her go now, please? They said we have to finish the episode first.
Oh, damn it. But yes, I think with time I grew less concerned, but also I realized pretty early on that I didn't really have a good way of assessing body fat. And I remember at the peak of my bulk, I got a body fat assessment done. I want to say it was BodPod, and it estimated me 18% at around 250 pounds, and that was not 18%. So for me, I think I've always been a bit cognizant that, hey, these body fat assessments are not accurate.
And it was the norm. Well, I mean, it still is the norm. We may think it's not, but I think most people still feel like you will be better off being quite lean when you're starting a bulk. Obviously, there's drawbacks to starting a bulk and being, quite fat as well. Nobody's saying do that, but yeah, I think that's still a very persistent. It's a myth because you may not actually have any issues gaining muscle while being fat, but obviously there's health concerns and other issues that come with it. But I think a lot of people are still under that impression that if you are starting at a much leaner stage, you're gonna definitely make more gains as far as hypertrophy goes.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the idea of that didn't really stem from exercise science at all, right? Like it was in overfeeding studies back in like the 1980s, 1990s.
And anecdotally, we have that was one point that the guys over at SBS made where I was like, oh yeah, true. Like rugby players, American football players, wrestlers, heavyweight powerlifters, strongmen. Like if hypertrophy was so badly affected at higher body fat levels, Eddie Hall back in his prime wouldn't be the beast that he was. He would be looking significantly less muscular than leaner competitors at a similar height and similar weight. Not similar weight, but similar height.
100%. I think, though, that there was also anecdotal support for the opposite to an extent. So a lot of bodybuilders in the culture were like, oh, after you're done with your show, that's when you're going to see a huge rebound in muscle mass, and you're going to see like the best growth you always see, like, you're primed to grow, etc., because you're so lean. So there was also kind of the opposite anecdotal support in a sense, where I think a lot of physique athletes still cling to the idea of, oh yeah, right after a show, that's when your best training and your best muscle growth happens, when in reality, you're just regaining some muscle that you lost, looking full because you're eating 12,000 calories while binging, but you're still pretty lean, so you look pretty good. But I don't think there's anything to that, at least in the context of post-contest prep.
Yeah. And post-contest prep is also super unique to a few individuals only. Yeah. And I think it changes if you take PDs, etc., obviously, because then a lot of things change. But on principle, I don't think there's anything special as far as muscle growth goes to rebounding from contest prep lean to a normal body fat. Yeah, there was a really nice exchange of ideas or dialogue or whatever you want to call it between SBS, Stronger by Science, and Menno Henselmans. If you Google Stronger by Science P ratio, you'll get a series of articles, and you can also check Menno's articles. I think both of them are really cool to read. They will take some time, but definitely worth it if you are one of those geeks that likes to...
Loser.
Yeah, exactly. If you have
no
life... Or you can
just make a podcast, move on with your life, make gains, be happy, make lots of money too.
Make a lot of money. Money is number one here. Free the guys.
I'm sure you're doing your side hustle while you're listening to the podcast. If so, keep it up.
I'm sawing under the table right now. I'm sewing hats and drop shipping.
I'm pimping my cat right underneath the desk. Nice.
That's as one does. So, me personally, I never, because I was fat, I never bothered with guesting. Was fat and without the muscle though. So I never bothered doing any sort of measurements. When I got access to the BotPod at uni, obviously we did test it, and I got because I went from 130 kilos down to 100. The lowest I saw was 16%. The highest was 32 when I was like 136 kilos. Or something like that.
So you lost 15 kilograms of muscle pretty much while cutting down.
Yeah, exactly. But the BotPod is quite bad, like, because on one day it could show 16, on the other one it could show 22%, and that you've lost a bunch of muscle. But overall, when you are looking at whether you're too high in body fat, I think you're obviously, okay, we got to factor in that body dysmorphia is also a thing, and you will get people that are, that may be quite lean actually, and will look in the mirror and think, I am quite fat. But I think the mirror is one of your best tools to actually decide, and how you feel as well, of whether you're too fat or not, and whether you're, comfortable enough to add a few more pounds to your frame. But I'd say there are certain metrics that you can also track, certain measurements that can give you a reassurance tap on the back as far as health is concerned, because many people out there are comfortable with their body composition, but they don't want to reach a stage where they're unhealthy and are pushing their bulk too far, and it comes as a detriment to their health. So one of those measurements, which I am a big proponent of as of lately, and others have pushed heavily, barbell medicine have done so for some time, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be some sort of pioneer, is waist circumference. We have pretty good data to show that waist circumference can be a solid predictor as far as all-cause mortality goes, and as far as a bunch of cardiac diseases and other bad stuff for your health. So, and that's mainly because of its association with visceral fat. There was a recent study, and it's nice that we can do this now from our computers, because I can actually tell you the study's name. That I am buying myself time, but essentially, there we go. So this study was called, and this is from 2 years ago, Waist Circumference as a Vital Sign in Clinical Practice, a consensus statement from the IAS and ICCR Working Group on Visceral Obesity. And they make a very good point about, hey, this is a very easy metric to track. It can give you quite a bit of insight in quotation marks, and it's associated with a bunch of stuff. So as long as your waist circumference is in check while you're bulking, and you are roughly below 37 inches or close to 90 to 94 centimeters for men, and around 31 inches for women, you are solid as far as it will be very difficult for you to be medically obese, obviously not just by BMI, and have a waist circumference that will be below those values. So yeah, you may be, if you're feeling good and you are looking fine, although you may not look as defined or as hard as you would normally want to. If the bulk is going well, your performance in the gym is up, your waist circumference has not passed the, let's say, 37-inch cutoff point for men, and you are, you still believe that you can gain some productive weight, that makes sense, then go for it. At the same time, if you're also somebody who is physically active, so if you're getting in 8 to 10,000 steps per day. We also have really good data on that with the classic paper, Daily Steps and All-Cause Mortality, a meta-analysis of 15 international cohorts showing a significant reduction, again, in all-cause mortality, a risk for all-cause mortality for people that are below 60 years old. That sort of peaks somewhere around 7,000 to 8,000 steps, and then it starts sort of plateauing. It keeps decreasing, and for people above 60 years, it again peaks right around 8,000 or so. So if you're getting 8 to 12,000 steps per day, your waist circumference is in check, and you're feeling good, you're probably fine to keep pushing your bulk, and you don't really have to worry about an essentially not arbitrary number, but if a BIA scale or a Botport or a DEXA says that you're 24% body fat or whatever percent body fat or 21%, that's not something you necessarily have to worry about. And to further back that up, there was a very recent review, a systematic review and meta-analysis called Bodyfat and Risk of All-Cause Mortality, a systematic review and dose-response meta-analysis of prospective cohort studies, where they essentially included 35 prospective cohort studies with 900,000 participants with 68,000 deaths overall. And what was not surprising, but because I think also in our field, people have associated certain percentages with certain looks. So like 20% is considered morbidly obese, whereas like a muscular individual at actually 20% body fat will be looking like a healthy guy who lifts weights, or a healthy girl. But what they found is that, and allow me to get this up. Nice. First try. So for men, the body fat percentage that was with the lowest risk as far as all-cause mortality went was around 22%, and for women it was around let me see, 30 something percent. Yeah, 33. I'll get back to you on that in a second, just so I don't buy myself time. But anyways, we know that body fat estimation methods can be somewhat off. They can vary from even up to 10% in some cases.
Yeah, really depending on method, yeah.
Yeah, with BIA being one of the worst, BOTBOT also not being that great, DEXA being okay-ish, but also not being insane. Anything else you want to say about body fat assessment methods?
Not directly. I do think that now we're kind of veering into steps as well. But before we move away from body fat percentage itself, I think it's important to acknowledge a few things. Body fat percentage is definitely important for health, right? Like it plays a role, but it's not as simple as all body fat percentages are created the same. So
Exactly.
you could be 22% and be in pretty good health, or you could be 20% not being in very good health. So the distribution of your body fat also matters.
Yes.
So one less commonly available metric, but pretty helpful metric, is visceral fat, or visceral adipose tissue. So waist circumference may be somewhat correlated to visceral adipose tissue. So basically, visceral adipose tissue refers to fat tissue that isn't stored subcutaneously, so not right beneath your skin, and is rather stored sort of between your organs, and that is generally associated with worse health. Like subcutaneous adipose tissue isn't too problematic unless you have a ton of it, but visceral adipose tissue is pretty much always bad news. Above maybe 500 grams or so of visceral adipose tissue in your whole body is where you start seeing meaningful health decrements. So there was a paper on visceral adipose tissue, which I can define in a second, where essentially the association between all-cause mortality risk and visceral adipose tissue was that up until around 500 grams or half a kilogram of visceral adipose tissue, your risk of all-cause mortality remained pretty consistent. But then above that, basically the more visceral adipose tissue or visceral fat you had, the worse it got. And so that's something that I think if you have access to that data, it's very useful to have. But I think that it does, for lifters at least, or for people who are physically active, it does kind of coincide or correlate with body fat percentage, where if you get much above, say, 20-25%, it probably starts to get somewhat worse, for men at least. And so that's probably most of the time, unless you have like an aesthetic preference or a lifestyle preference or that sort of stuff, for being much above like 25% for men. I think that's sort of where most men, I think, should probably be like, may not be worth pushing much past this unless I have a reason to.
Yeah, spot on, man. And both Milo and I had DEXA scans in Greece as part of a lab visit. Milo's visceral tissue was 30 grams, which was crazy. Maybe too low? Not too low, right? I didn't see any...
I have a lot of good health habits as far as like I have an average step count of 15,000. I'm a reasonable body fat, like I was 13.5%. And I've been really physically active for half a decade. I get like 10 servings at least of fruits and vegetables in on average. So a lot of my health habits are really solid. So it's very much possible, like it's not unheard of. But yeah, it's low. I was going to say, based on the systematic review I was looking at for visceral adipose tissue, you can see relative increases in all-cause mortality risk of up to 100% or so with higher visceral adipose tissue compared to lower adipose tissue.
Nice. Mine was 200. Wow, sorry, that was the one I did here. It was around 300 grams. I had done a DEXA scan in the UK before as well. But what I wanted to say was on the visceral fat comment is that's another solid point around the idea that, hey, just if you visually look a certain way, you're definitely going to be healthier than somebody who may be looking slightly or somewhat different. So you can get individuals who are lean, but who may, drink or have certain habits, or even, have been dealt a bad hand as far as genetics go, and they may look healthy on the outside, and we see that often, obviously, with also bodybuilders that abuse PEDs, etc. But on the inside, things can be quite off. So That's one metric, I guess, where if you get a DEXA scan, that's useful to look at, obviously. And that's why I got mine done here in the UK. I was really curious to see what was the deal there. But
100%. Another
Okay, I got it.
paper on visceral adipose tissue and all-cause mortality risk, titled "Visceral Fat is an Independent Predictor of All-Cause Mortality in Men," published in 2012, found that basically there's a graph in there as far as an odds ratio is concerned, so how much more likely compared to, let's say, for example, you have 250 grams of visceral fat, right? If you now had 1.25 kilograms of visceral fat, how much more likely are you to die in the next 10 years? It's that sort of statistic. Relative to having 0.25 kilograms of visceral fat, if you get up to around 1.25, your odds ratio goes up to 5 or 6 times that of if you had 250 grams. So, and it seems to be kind of like almost an exponential trend, where up until maybe 500, 800 grams, you see relatively modest increases, like quite modest increases even, of all-cause mortality risk. But then as you accumulate more visceral fat past that, your risk of all-cause mortality sort of drastically and exponentially goes up. So I'd say for most lifters who are pretty physically active, like going to be getting at least 6,000 steps a day and at a reasonable body fat percentage, have been lifting for a while, you're probably not in any major trouble. But it can be a useful metric to get at least once, just to know that you're in the clear. Maybe get a DEXA scan once, see if your visceral fat is reasonable. And for most people, it won't be an issue if they're pretty physically active and at a reasonable body fat, but it's still, I think, a useful metric to have knowledge of.
And the other thing you could see on a DEXA scan is your body fat distribution. So for me specifically, I store most of my body fat around my legs and ass, for like a better term, which was also a thumbs up as far as health goes. Obviously, you'll see things like bone density as well, but I expect if you're lifting heavy, your bone density will be way above average.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention is Menno had done an article a year, 2 years ago, some years ago, or maybe recently, I don't remember. I'll pull it up actually, where he talked about body fat percentage and health, and Menzelmans is what I wrote.
Amazing.
So
in the meantime, one thing I wanted to bring up is I agree that body fat distribution can also matter in that sense. So one of the reasons why, on average, women may have a longer life expectancy than men is because they have something called a gynoid body fat distribution.
Same.
Exactly, same here as well.
What the guy said.
Hey, so they store more of their body fat in their legs and less around their waist. And usually storing fat around your waist is not the best for health, whereas storing fat in your legs by comparison is pretty good. And so men have kind of like an apple body fat distribution, where a lot of their fat is centered around their waist and their chest oftentimes, and not so much on their arms and legs. For women, it's kind of the opposite, where usually they have relatively smaller waists, relatively leaner torsos, but fatter legs, and that's positive for health overall.
That's spot on. So he cited so let's see when this was written. I can't really see that. Anyways, he kind of said that for women, as a rule of thumb, the lowest. Okay, that's the lowest actually. For men, he mentioned something along the lines of 10 to 15%, and for women, citing I think maybe 30% as the cutoff point. I'm trying to see here; it's a ton of information. Yeah, okay, there you go. It says, based on the above data, it seems that our health takes a turn for the worse, somewhere between 12 to 16% body fat for women and 5 to 13% for men. Now, he cited a study that looked, I think, it was a similar, I think it was a cohort study that looked, though, at only a few hundred people, and I think maybe 70 deaths. So the study that I mentioned, which is quite recent, looked at 900,000 people and 70,000 deaths. Plus, he has cited a figure that shows the relative risk of dying in fully adjusted models that included BMI and body fat percentage together, which I think comes in with a few limitations as far as lifters go. Because if you look at some of the other graphs on that study, was things were slightly different. Anyways, nobody's saying, hey, aim to be X% body fat. I wouldn't aim to be any body fat percentage because, again, if you're somebody who's training for the looks, if you look good in the mirror and your waist circumference is on point, if you get a DEXA scan and your visceral fat is on point and you're physically active and resistance training, you are ticking a lot of boxes as far as being healthy goes. So it's very unlikely that you will be morbidly obese with a waist circumference that is in check.
No, 100%. And I think for lifters especially, this is where it's important to acknowledge that BMI is not a good metric necessarily. It's not a terrible metric on a population scale. So when you're dealing with people who don't necessarily lift, BMI can be a pretty good indicator of, okay, well, how likely are you to be so fat, quote unquote, that you have a lot of visceral fat, that your metabolic markers are getting worse, etc. When it comes to lifters, oftentimes you can have a BMI of 25, which is technically overweight, or BMI of 28, or 30 plus even sometimes, and still be in good health overall. Now, could your health be better if you were a bit leaner? Potentially. No. But are we talking about small differences because you're physically active and because you have plenty of muscle and that's what makes up your higher BMI score? Yes. So I think for lifters, paying a bit less attention to BMI and a bit more attention to overall lifestyle habits and waist circumference and that sort of stuff can definitely be a good shift.
Yeah. So the paper cited in Menno's article, and there's not throwing any shade to the guy that was, I think the other paper wasn't available when he wrote the article, so what he cited, what he mentioned makes sense based on the available data then. Relationship among body fat percentage, body mass index, and all-cause mortality. And they looked at 49. What? They looked at a few. Yeah, they actually looked at 49,000 women and 5,000 men, and they had a total of, let's say, 6,000-ish deaths versus 900,000 individuals overall and 70,000 deaths. So I'm a bit more confident looking at the other study because it fits my bias. But other than that, the hazard, like when they looked at they looked at body fat percentage by itself and body fat percentage and BMI. Obviously, in Gen Pop, high BMI and high body fat percentage is probably points at an unhealthy situation, right? Whereas if you're a lifter who carries a lot of muscle mass, and muscle mass itself can be something that reduces your risk for all-cause mortality up to an extent. It doesn't mean that, hey, Ronnie Coleman at his peak was the healthiest man alive, but muscle mass overall is good for a bunch of reasons, not just quality of life, but also insulin sensitivity and so on and so forth. In other words, so I wouldn't be super confident in looking at that data and from Gen Pop and extrapolating it to lifters directly. Because if we look at just body fat percentage, and okay, I'm just looking at this now on the fly, it may be that I'm missing something, so apologies, but the health hazard ratio for mean body fat percentage for men, if we look at we're losing them. Anyways, it was also somewhat closer to like the hazard ratio wasn't as bad as one adjusting for BMI as well.
No, 100%. I do think now that we've kind of established, okay, well, look, there's a relatively wide range of body fat percentages that can be healthy for men and for women, especially when engaging in consistent lifting. That BMI may not be the best metric to track, that a lot of measurement methods are inaccurate as far as assessing body fat. So having a body fat percentage goal may not be ideal, and it may be better to go off of other things to guide your weight gain, weight loss, whatever journey. I guess it might be worth talking about what sort of body fat recommendations we have, right? Like what sort of body fat should you be gaining weight at, maybe when should you lose weight, Is there even such a thing as an exact number? Is it more so about other factors? That sort of stuff. So I guess my question to you would be, what body fat recommendations would you give to someone who came to you and said, hey, I'm not sure if I should cut or bulk? What should I do?
Yeah. So it's assuming their waist circumference, so assuming they're a man and their waist circumference is below 37 inches, let's say they're right there. So for example, myself, I'm measuring somewhere between 36 and 36.5, depending on the day, or 36.3. For myself, if I came to myself and I said, hey, should I bulk? I am quite heavy. My body fat percentage is definitely somewhere in the low 20s. Yes, I am healthy. I'm walking 12,000 to 15,000 steps the past few years, lifting weights, blood work, blah, 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 pressure. So everything is in check. Waist circumference is at the moment in check. But if I was to gain weight, after a few kilos, that would instantly cross the cutoff point, and I wouldn't be able to spend a ton of time in a calorie surplus. So if somebody like myself came to myself and said, hey, I am healthy at the moment, should I bulk or should I cut? I'd say it would be best if you did a mini cut, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, or even longer if possible. Lose some body fat, give yourself some space as far as waist circumference goes, so that then you can spend a good amount of time in a surplus and you can really make the most out of your bulk versus potentially negatively affecting your health. Not that, a short-term bulk where you go, you're over 37 inches in waist circumference, as there are studies that have recommended 40 inches as a cutoff point. It's not like you're all of a sudden going to be getting heart attacks and strokes, especially if you're physically active and training hard. But at the same time, ideally, why cross that cutoff point and why risk your health? On the other hand, if somebody came to me and said, hey, my waist is around 34 inches. I feel really good. I feel as if I could be looking leaner at the moment, but I'm comfortable overall. I would say, hey, it's probably worth committing to a lean gains phase and gaining weight over time, as that is going to have the biggest impact on your physique long term. Obviously, you could do a cut now and look somewhat leaner, but building muscle takes time, and it takes a long time. I mean, there have been studies that looked at the time course of muscle building, and although we have very little evidence on trained individuals, like there's a classic study by Hakkinen. Obviously, that was in elite weightlifters, but over the course of 2 years, they gained like 2 kilos of muscle mass. Obviously, they weren't, I don't know if they were bulking or whatever, but it can take time to gain a significant amount of muscle mass if you're a trained individual. So if you're comfortable with your current body composition and your waist circumference is in check, let's push ahead. If, though, because that's where personal preference comes in play, if you say, hey, I'm feeling very pudgy now, and you're getting the feedback you're getting from a client is, I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm not looking good, and that then affects their motivation to train or affects their overall buy-in to whatever you're doing, then that's another scenario where, hey, we may benefit from you losing some weight, even if it's just for sheer placebo effect that you're looking leaner, and now you can build muscle without getting as fat as you would otherwise. Did I cover you?
I agree 100%. I think rather than hard cutoff points for body fat percentage, etc., they're definitely there's more of a range, right? And you can certainly inform your bulking off of health metrics as well, like if you have access to them. So I think generally there's 2 to 3 broad considerations when deciding whether to cut or bulk, whether you're in a good place to cut, whether you're in a good place to bulk. One is aesthetic preference and sort of lifestyle preference, and the extent to which you even care about that, because some people don't care that much, and I don't really see a benefit to being leaner or heavier or fatter or what have you as far as lifestyle either. Like, they don't care if they're 20% can eat a bit more or 15% can eat a bit less, that sort of stuff. The second one would be preference and risk tolerance for health. So some people aren't that concerned with their healths. Some people are concerned and won't take any detriment to their health. So you kind of have to realize, just like with investing, different people have different risk tolerances. And so you kind of have to situate yourself on that spectrum as well and decide how much of a risk you're willing to take. And then finally, also to an extent, what is easier and more realistic to achieve now. So a lot of people are like, oh, like I'm 20%, I look like shit, I don't like the lifestyle, I feel pudgy, etc. But then a lot of people have, for example, difficulties with their eating relationship, like how they feel towards food. They've been dieting for fucking 12 months straight. In that case, yeah, sure, on paper, your health may benefit from cutting. You may look better to yourself as well if you lose some weight. But are you going to be able to do that, or is it going to lead to more damage to your relationship with food? And so are you not better served gaining some weight first, even when it comes to a minor detriment to your physiological health, and then later on considering cutting when you're in a better place as far as your relationship with food is concerned? So I think it's your aesthetic preference and how much you care about that. It's your lifestyle preference. It's your concern with health and your risk tolerance. And finally, it's whatever is actually achievable, because oftentimes, like a lot of clients that come to you as a coach, I imagine, want to lose weight. And to me, like for me, honestly, something like 10, 20% of those, at least, come to me like, oh yeah, I want to lose weight, I want to get to this body fat. And based on their lifestyle and diet experience, I'm like, now is not the best time. Let's consider gaining some weight first and then going into it. I will say, it's funny, at the peak of my bulk, when I was about 250 pounds or 115 kilograms, I had essentially diabetic test done on me. I had fasting blood glucose taken, and also I had HbA1c, so glycated hemoglobin, which is a much better marker of diabetes. Basically, it's a snapshot of the past 3 months of your life in terms of glycemic control, like how good you are at regulating blood glucose. And I was at the bottom end of the healthy range, like really good, like extremely good. And that was at the peak of my bulk while eating about 1,000 grams of carbs a day and being like 25% body fat or something. And that's just because I was training 12 times a week. I was very physically active. I was blasting it. And so while body fat percentage can tell you some stuff, physical activity, etc., can really counteract a lot of the health detriments potentially of higher body fat percentages. And oftentimes that, because a lot of the health detriments of higher body fat percentages have to do, for example, with visceral fat. But with physical activity, you can shift the body fat distribution somewhat, for example, and have less visceral fat even as you get fatter. You can offset a lot of that, and I think that's where part of the health at every size movement sort of comes from. It's coming from when they say, oh, you can be healthy at a variety of body fat percentages, and there is truth to that, in that you can offset a lot of the negatives of being a higher body fat percentage just by being physically active. So whether you're 30% body fat or 15% body fat, yeah, your health will look different, but if you're physically active in both cases, you'll be in reasonably good health in both cases. You won't be in your best health, but you can be in pretty good health, right? And so I think considering your aesthetic preference, your health preference, and sort of risk tolerance for health detriments, and what's actually achievable, I think those three should be at the forefront. Realizing that the body fat percentage at which you're operating doesn't really impact how well you gain strength or muscle, besides like major health complications that come from it. I think realizing that really opens up the playing field for you, and it brings it down to those few considerations that I brought up.
Yeah, and a nice point on the health at every size crowd, because, again, I think you and I will find ourselves, like with most topics, unfortunately, in the middle, where you get the freaks on one side, where they're like, yeah, you're too fat, you're going to die. On the other hand, though, you have the freaks on the other side where, okay, bro, being 400 pounds, sure, you can shift some of those risks by being physically active, but being very high, extremely high in body fat can also be a ticking time bomb. And in the off chance where you are unable to be physically active for a bit of time, then that comes with other risks. But the truth is, again, somewhere in the middle. Just because somebody may be fatter, again, we're not talking documentary fat here, that doesn't necessarily automatically mean that they're much less healthy than you are.
100%. And I think what is striking to me from an outside perspective, I'm definitely not an obesity expert, but it's just a range of things for which a higher BMI puts you at increased risk for stuff. Like whether it's knee pain, like arthritis, or even depression, that sort of stuff. Like there are so many things where just being at a higher BMI or being obese can put you at higher risk. So you can definitely counteract a lot of those things with increased physical activity, but I think it's just fighting an uphill battle a little bit,
Exactly, and based on the data that we just shared, because for women the cutoff point was somewhere around 33% body fat, and for men it was 22%. Obviously, terms and conditions apply. How that was measured is another story, and it could have been that there were 17% body fat or 25 or whatever. But it's not that you don't need to be lean as far as our definition of fitness world definition of lean to be super healthy. So why not just be at an average body fat percentage, which for men I think is around 25%, the average Gen Pop body fat percentage. Why not be closer to that where you're still fat enough to not have to really worry about your body composition, but not fat enough for you to be freaking out about your health, versus being way too fat if that doesn't serve a purpose. Like if you're a competitive athlete and it really helps your leverages being like if you're a powerlifter or a wrestler and competing at a certain category helps you, sure, but I don't see a ton of pros at as a man being 35% body fat unless it is really what you love doing.
I agree 100%. I think there is a real divergence as well in the fitness world of what looks the best and what we then assume thereby also is the healthiest, right?
Yeah.
So I think when you see someone that's 10% looks great on the beach, etc., you're like, oh, that guy must be really healthy, In reality, that's not always true, and you might have slightly worse health at 10% body fat as a man as at 15, even though you look better. It's a weird thing in the fitness industry, I think, where I can kind of see where the people who resort to saying, oh, you're being fat phobic or what have you, are coming from, in a sense, because I think there is a weird thing where there's a sense of superiority, inherent superiority, or morality assigned to being lean and working hard for it, hard work essentially.
Exactly.
There was an interesting study at the start of COVID, for example, where people were asked what they saw. This is off memory, so I might be wrong here. What they saw as more dangerous, going to the beach or being in the library, and people said that going to the beach was more dangerous for COVID spreading. And it's because that sense of morality is kind of tied into what people perceive as being dangerous or better or right? Where, going to the beach, it's kind of frivolous, you do it for the fun of it, etc., but you're outside. And so even though it's outside versus being inside, yeah, sure, you're in the library, you're studying, whatever, but you are inside and you're at high risk of spreading COVID, people saw going to the beach as being more dangerous because it was kind of more pleasant or more for fun or more frivolous. And so I think with body fat, it's a similar thing where people see getting to a lower body fat as being more disciplined and being harder, etc., and so it must be healthier.
Yeah.
When in reality, there's kind of a distinction there between, okay, what looks the best and what, might take the most work versus what's actually healthiest.
Yeah, and that's a story of my life, actually. Usually get the question of, hey, man, you're looking great, looking swole, looking big. When are you going to do the cut? When are you going to get shredded? When are you going to get super lean? And yeah, even though getting lean is hard work and it requires a lot of effort. At the same time, one, it doesn't align with everybody's priorities. And after a certain age, when we got into lifting, it was all about, hey, my life revolved around how I looked and what I lifted. But once work and other venues, other pursuits in your life become priorities, for example, your PhD, our research, our work, etc., it's, for some people, it's not worth the trade-off between social time and, traveling and being able to eat a bit more versus getting a thumbs up from 3 guys at the gym who will say, hey, looking lean. But yeah, people often, I say that now, and most people a lot of people in our world will perceive it as, you don't have the discipline to get lean. I do, but if getting lean it becomes a goal. If it's not a goal, or if I don't care about it, I'm not just going to do it to do it. You know what I mean?
I get you 100%. And I think even psychologically, the healthiest body fat percentage is probably a bit higher than people would like. When I was 8 to 12% maybe, I was a lot more concerned with my appearance and had negative thoughts about it than when I'm 12 to 18. For example, one of the symptoms of body dysmorphia disorder is body checking. So just looking at how often you look at your body and look at it and obsessive with certain details, right?
I remember those days.
that really diminishes as you get to a reasonable body fat. So like for me, between 12 and 20% usually. I'm like, I don't barely look at myself. I look at myself like once a day maybe in the mirror and be like, oh, looking fine,
Looking
I guess.
good.
And I just move on,
Looking good.
And then I just move on, Whereas when you get like below 10%, below 12%, that generally increases, and generally concerns over how you look or how certain body parts look or just body image concerns increase. And so I think the physiological data on health and body fat percentage mirrors my experience, at least with, and I think a lot of competitors' experience in physique sports with psychological health around their body as well.
Yeah.
So I'd say it's probably worth doing, even if only for psychological health reasons.
Yeah. And the same point goes for getting jacked or getting super strong. Like, many people just want to get in the gym, gain some muscle, some strength, get the health benefits of resistance training. They are not complete fucktards like we are as far as physical standards go, where we see pro bodybuilders and we're like, well, yeah, it looks good. And yeah, just because they don't want to spend 5 days a week in the gym, training super hard, going through sets and sets of exercises that are very uncomfortable, and at the same time really, really focus on their recovery and nutrition, and they just want to, do 3 sessions a week, 30 minutes, make sure they're eating a bit more protein, and that's that. That doesn't make them lazy. If anything, it still puts them way above the average person as far as physical activity and taking care of themselves goes, which I think people are completely ignorant to in our field. Like, the average person doesn't resistance train and eat healthy and walk. The average person has built horrible habits that are definitely going to affect them later in life. Anyways, I'm not going to start ranting. But yeah.
Just 2 quick notes. One, obviously the minimum dose guy would be shilling for just getting in the gym a couple times a week and doing whatever you want for everything. Secondly, I do think fitness is kind of a strange echo chamber at times as well, where the people who get into fitness and stay in fitness are people who are pretty conscientious, who work pretty hard, and who I think morally generally see hard work as being something to strive for. And so if something's more hard work, like getting leaner or spending more time in the gym to get those extra last percentages, those marginal improvements, they'll generally see it as superior and something to strive for, and something, in some cases, to shame other people for not doing.
Yeah.
Right? Like whether that's not, doing your AM PM sessions, or not blasting the recovery, or not taking all the supplements, or, not getting to 8% body fat as a man. I think a lot of cases that can happen, and a culture can foster that sort of thing.
And the triple standards, again, double standards that exist, where, like, we know personally of a lot of people who are extremely disciplined in and out the gym as far as training and nutrition goes, but that discipline then doesn't transfer to other areas of their life, professional, personal, and a lot of those people are also not paying much attention to their mental health. So for a lot of people, working hard and eating a certain way after a point becomes autopilot and becomes a habit and something they really enjoy, because they get that constant tap on the back from themselves saying, "Hey, well done, well done." And we both love training hard. Even if we go on holiday, a hard training session is something we enjoy. Same with steps. Same with eating a certain way. But for a lot of those people, they justifying what they do as or giving it a higher purpose sort of context allows them to keep doing it. But at the same time, discipline is not only training and eating a certain way, especially if you just want to be healthy and strong. Anyways, best episode thus far, in my opinion. I think we can call it a day here. Also, if you actually want to measure body fat percentage accurately, you could schedule a consultation call with Greg Doucet. He seems to be the best at doing so. Very, very triggering when he does that. Like the visual estimation of body fat, as if what?
Yeah. Hey, he has
12%.
He has a master in exercise physiology. He knows.
You can get coaching though for $40,000. So.
Really?
Yeah. So if you get
wait, really?
Yeah, one-on-one coaching for 1 year. Oh, $39,000. It's discounted.
Fuck. $500 for a 20-minute phone consult?
Yeah. Where's your God now, Milo? With your 100?
All right, I'm gonna go increase my prices.
Yeah. But respect, though, if one person, imagine, like, one person. There we go. If the one crazy, millionaire who's like, yeah, I gotta hire the best, like, one person has bought this at some point, and that was a nice email that came in his inbox.
40,000.
40K.
That's a new core right there.
Yeah. All right. From us to you, to all of us. I'm just translating from Greek to English, doing the anabolic window outro. But yeah, thank you for watching and listening. We appreciate you. Best episode thus far. Check us out on Instagram at Dr._Pack and
Wolfcoach_.
Wolfcoach_. Yeah, I was thinking how many underscores are there. Peace.
Peace.